I'm going to just do this for a minute. About these little things that we put in here.
It's a very beautiful house. I love the colors.
It's been a long time coming. Yeah, I like that a lot. This is our favorite wall in the house, and everybody on this wall is family. Either my family or Catherine's family or our family, except for this one picture. That's Barbara Mettler. My name is Deborah Cutrer, and I am a veteran teacher of over 30 years. Originally from Tucson, Arizona. Now living on the vineyard for about the past 20. Been an educator since I'm 21 years old. Other than a brief bout in owning a restaurant on the vineyard, that's all I've done is teach school. The most important things to me are, besides my job, because I love teaching school, are my family and movement. That's the basis of my life, is teaching, movement, and family.
Tell me everything about movement that you have experienced, or your stories, your experiences of movement.
My movement experiences?
Yes.
No. I don't know if we have that much film. Like I said, I'm from Tucson, Arizona, and when I was 10 years old, my mother introduced me to a woman by the name of Miss Callie Francis, and Miss Callie was brought into my life just to teach me, like, how to enter a room, composure, things like that. She taught me how to waltz, and my brother and my sister as well. We used to have to go to Miss Callie's every Saturday, and it was just my mother's way of teaching us something other than running around outside being lunatics. And Miss Callie knew a woman by the name of Barbara Mettler, and Barbara Mettler had just come to Tucson. She had just opened up her studio. It's called the Tucson Creative Dance Center. It was just newly opened, maybe a couple of years before I came in, I'm not certain. I was 10 years old in 1963, so she must have started that in the early 60s. The building itself is a beautiful construction. It's designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. And when you see the studio, it's on Fort Lowell Road in Tucson. And when you see the studio, it kind of comes up out of the desert and has these long turquoise-like arms that reach over the roof. So it's really an impressive structure, and I remember the first time coming in there, before I'd ever met Barbara, I could tell that that was going to be a magical place, before I'd ever had any contact with Barbara Mettler. And so as a kid, you know, you don't know what's awaiting you, and you go in, you sit down, and we were waiting on the steps, and in walks this graceful, magnificent woman clothed in all black except for her white hair, a black scarf. And just her presence was commanding. And again, you knew you were somewhere special. And she had to be in her mid-50s at that point. And I danced with her until I came to the vineyard. I danced with her until maybe I was 35. So I must have danced under her instruction for 25 to 30 years. I've never had another dance instructor in my life. I've only had one. I danced with Barbara from that day that I was introduced to her by Miss Callie, and I danced until I left Tucson in various capacities. She's definitely the most influential person in my life. There's no doubt about it. And movement is the most important force that has shaped who I am today. Even in the classroom, I can tell the impact of movement on me. Because in the 60s, there was this big movement towards modern dance. The modern dance and creative movement are not the same thing. Creative movement, again, being schooled by Barbara Mettler, I'm only governed by her practices. And there aren't too many people that can say that, because most people will come and they'll have Barbara Mettler's experience, and it's either on top of something else they've already had with someone else, another training, or they'll go and they'll seek out other experiences after that. Barbara Mettler's been my only instructor as a dancer and as a mover. The thing I like about movement, I love dance, but I was way more aware of the importance of movement before I connected it to dance. Dance and movement aren't the same thing. Movement is an element of dance, but so is music. If you like to dance to music or you like to choreograph, all of those things go into making a production that's satisfying for either the dancer or for the audience. But movement is something that can be experienced all by yourself. Movement is a kinesthetic experience, meaning that it's not as important as to how the movement looks as much as my feeling of the movement. And the joy or enjoyment that the audience, if there is an audience, gets from that is based on my experience. And they can then look at that and enjoy it however they so choose. But they cannot experience movement by watching it. And that's how I was raised, to believe that movement is an experience that is open to everybody. Okay? Even like Barbara used to always say, even if you were in a wheelchair, there's probably some element that of yourself that you can sense movement in, whether it's the blink of an eye, the twitch of a muscle. She used to always say, movement is so primary and so basic that you see children skipping down the street in joyous movement, and they don't think about its connection to dance or its rhythm or anything else. Babies crawl and they spin and they turn because we're naturally moving creatures, regardless of our limitations or our abilities. Movement in some way governs our life, even the muscular movement of our heartbeat. And that's pretty much where my movement experience began. In the children's class, we meet on Saturday morning, and it was a ritual. You'd go in and you'd go into the studio and you'd go into the dressing room and put on your dance suit or whatever you were gonna wear. And when you're little kids, you're just always wearing your shorts and stuff. It really doesn't matter. But the minute you walked out of that dressing room, you didn't run around the studio disrespectfully or beat on the drums, and you didn't have to be told not to either. You knew the reverence of the place. You knew the reverence of the opportunity. And I just remember us all going, and you'd go, and as soon as you were ready, you would go and you would sit on the steps and you'd wait. And then as kids came in, they'd go and they'd get dressed and they'd sit on the steps. And then like a minute before class, the patio door would swing open and Barbara would enter and she'd come up to us and greet us. And then we'd all walk into the studio together. And that was done that way every Saturday. You didn't go into the studio before she came in and run up and down the stairs and do all the things you wanted to. You realized the sanctity of the studio and the significance in your life. Like I said earlier, movement pretty much governs who I am. When Barbara talks about the kinesthetic sense and how as dancers, if I'm in a group dance, if my kinesthetic sense is developed, I don't need to look laterally in order to know what my movers next to me are doing, you know. I don't need to focus on this dancer over here to get a sense of their movement, because I can feel that movement kinesthetically. It's not about what I see them doing, it's about what I feel them doing. I grew up learning that if I am in tune enough to my own movement and to the movement of those people around me, I can get a sense of someone's movement, even if they're standing right next to me or behind me, or if my eyes are closed, because it's about kinesthetic awareness. It's about the feeling of what's going on out there. One of my favorite elements of Barbara's work is what she calls organic movement. And one of the reasons that Barbara's work governs my life so is that the basics that govern creative movement seem to me just naturally fit to everyday life. Kinesthetic awareness, being in tune with what's going on around you, you know. Organic movement, letting that movement come from a place rather than me just going, I want to move. And like when you're at the disco, you know, you're dancing, I'm looking good, I'm dancing. But creative movement's not about that. Creative movement is about that place where you where you experience movement from a place so within here that it's not about what my arm's doing, it's about me feeling what my hand's doing from the core here. That the slightest movement can be internalized and experienced from a place of beginning, that it's organic. It has a starting place. It has a place where it's created and it comes from. And the other thing that governs my life as far as Barbara's movement principles is something that she used to call the creative pause. And it's that place where, as a mover, you feel comfortable enough to pause and collapse into the movement. Let the movement have its own natural place to come from. You're not forcing it. You're not thinking about it. The movement is in itself a living experience. And I couldn't go back and do that right now again if I tried. That's gone. That was a movement there. And it came, one thing came from the other. The movement told me where it wanted to go. That's the organic nature of movement. Like that little kid skipping down the street. She's not going a 1 and a 2 and I'm skipping now, you know. She's not worried about her rhythm. She's caught up in the joy of the movement. And that's one of the main principles that governs not only my movement but my life. That place where we don't control most of the things around us, no matter how hard we try. It comes from a place that's organic. It's got a life of its own. Our lives have a life of its own. If you had told me when I was 10 years old that I would dance with Barbara until I was 40 and then move to Massachusetts, I would have never imagined that. I told you were certainly mistaken. I've grown up in Arizona my whole life. But life is organic. It has a beginning, it has a middle, it has an end, it develops. We all live, we exist, we die. Movement does the same thing. Movement has a place that it can come from. It can get erratic and speedy. It can have its own rhythm. It can have language. It can have sound that I make. One of my favorite experiences with Barbara was when we were kids. She would let us do these studies in own language, and we would. With Barbara, she was always there to make sure that when you're in movement, it's about the movement. It's not about acting. It's not about drama. It's not about portraying a certain thing. It's about the movement. The movement is always primary. And she used to let us do these studies where we could tell a story and create our own language with movement. And that was always one of my favorite experiences because it showed how expressive movement can be regardless of understanding of a verbal, oral understanding. You can, yes, go on now, boy, yeah, go, my, yeah, oh, yeah, bad, go, get like you want it, not bad, yeah, my, yeah, oh, yeah, no, man, yeah. Well, Nippy, I just go to bed. Yeah, you go to bed. Yeah, let's go. You don't need me to define that emotional experience. It comes through in the movement. And it's not a story. The movement just has an existence. Like we have an existence every day. We don't have to go home and tell people step by step what's happened in our lives because there's too much that unfolds. And that's the joy of movement for me, is that I can engage in movement regardless of what else is going on around me. And I don't need a space. You can lay on a floor by yourself in a room and have what you need. You don't need music. all you have, everything you need. Everything you need is here, whether you're working with sound, whether you're working with space, and working on a study that's only featuring how you use space. You know, movement involves time. It involves size, space. It involves design. You know, that place where you're not working real hard to do anything fancy. You're just working to connect to the shape of the movement. And one of the neat things about movement for me, it makes me real aware of myself, my body, because I've always been taught by Barbara that it's not enough for me to move my hand out here and think I'm doing something creative. I need to feel that movement here. And there's a difference between me doing this and me doing this. Even though my eyes are closed, I'm real aware of what my fingers are doing. I don't need to see them. I'm well aware of whether they're tight, relaxed, whether I've got them closed or open. When I do this movement, is my shoulder up versus this movement where my shoulder's down. That's all about my kinesthetic awareness and feeling things here in my core rather than worrying about what's going on out there. And that governs my life as a human being, you know. I love my parents very much, but they were difficult people to grow up with. And I think that it's my work with Barbara Mettler that kept me sane and safe and allowed me to keep my younger siblings on a path that was also sane and safe. Not that my parents didn't do the best they could. They did. And so my mother, like I said, introduced me to my work with Barbara. But living with them wasn't always easy, but yet my connection to movement kept me connected to, kept me grounded and kept me connected to life. One of the things that I love most about my work with Barbara, I remember when I was a little kid, like I said, my parents had a great deal of emotional strife in their own lives, and then that translated to emotional strife in our life. And so I was a pretty anxious little girl. You know, it was hard for me to sit still. I was nervous all the time. And when I first started my work with Barbara, I've never known anyone so unconditionally supportive of freedom and creativity than Barbara Mettler. And one thing that Barbara used to say, she used to say, freedom, control, freedom. Freedom, you start out free, and you can create freely. But if you do not bring in that element of control, then you never really know what true freedom is without control. It's the polarity, it's the partnership of freedom and control that leads to the ultimate free movement, you know. I can move around and do woo, 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 ah, yeah, and be, look, free, willy-nilly, yeah, woo, boo, but the truth of it is, I'm not really tapping into that freedom until I know how to control that. And until I know how to let it move wild if I want it to move wild, and contain it when I want to contain it. One thing I started to say when I first started working with Barbara, you know, I was a young kid and I was pretty stressed about things that were going on at home. And I remember one time I was supposed to be lying still, and that was hard for me. It was hard for me to sit still. Like, I would do this, and then I would do this, and I would do this, and that would all be within a few minutes, you know. And one day Barbara said to me, your movement is beautiful, but your stillness is stunning. And from that moment I learned to be still. And in that stillness, again, you get to experience the true power of movement. Because if you don't have stillness within movement, it's just one big chaotic flow. There's got to be a place of transition, again, for that creative pause, for a transition, for something to change, for something to grow. And again, I see that in my life. There are times in my life I need to be active, and I need to be engaged, and I need to be in control. And there are times in my life when I need to be still and be aware and wait. And without my work with Barbara, I would have never learned that, because my family was, though loving, it was in turmoil. And my angst came out physically. But Barbara taught me to be still. So any type of composure I have, whether that's in my life day to day or whether it's in front of the classroom, all that composure comes from my time with Barbara Miller. Everything I am, except for what I attribute to my parents, comes from my time with Barbara Miller. Yeah, that's exactly how I feel about that. She is my salvation. There's no doubt about that. That without her, I don't even know who I would have been. I can't imagine who I would have been. And that's massive. To be 61 years old and look back at all the multitude of experiences that I've had. Barbara's only one of many. Like, I was in Up With People. I did a lot of other things. I played field hockey when I was in college. But all of those things could have been removed, and they wouldn't have had any impact on my life that way. But my time with Barbara, removing that, and you change who I am. You change my whole life. I remember when she died, I was here on the vineyard. That loss was as difficult as losing my parents. Having her die. That was... I couldn't dance for a long time. I'm still a little paralyzed by it, but Barbara used to always say, don't do my work. Go out and make the work your own. I see friends, I have friends that do that, Griff Goring. She made the work her own. And Mary Ann Brim, that's never been something I've been able to do because my work with Barbara's so primal for me. It's hard for it not to be anybody's work but Barbara's. It's hard for me to move and not connect it to Barbara. So that's always been a struggle for me. I wish that I could do some of the things that I see people doing. But the emotion of it is what keeps me loving it so, and it's all tied up to Barbara Mettler. And I know she wouldn't be happy about that, but that's okay. Because she's got other people out there making the work their own, and I will always be a purist as far as her work's concerned. Because I don't have any other influence. So when I do the work, I'm doing the work that I was raised and reared to do by Barbara Mettler. So I love creative movement. I've taught it. I taught it a lot when I was younger. Taught it at the Y, and Boys and Girls Clubs and things like that. I even tried to teach it at the charter school. What's hard though is I have a different persona at the charter school. I have a math persona at the charter school. I'm not Deborah at the charter school. I'm DC. And that's a whole different element of who I am. And DC has only been in existence this part of a life that's this big. If you went back to Arizona and said, oh, I had a math teacher, she was from Tucson, her name was DC, do you know her? And I don't know who you're talking about. But if you went and you said, I have this teacher, her name was Deborah Cutrer, they'd know who you were talking about. But that's also because my life here is based on who I've grown to be. And when I go to the charter school and I'm a math teacher, that's only working on one small element of who I am. Although I've taught since I was 21 years old, I've done creative movement since I was 10. So my creative movement impacts my teaching more than my teaching impacts my movement. So when I go to the charter school and I'm teaching math, it's real hard for me to change hats. I can't switch hats in the middle. This was difficult enough, because I'm talking to you as if you're not my student and have never been my student. Mm-hmm. But yet I'm always aware of the fact that you were once my student. And the minute I even go there, I'm sure you can hear a change in my tone, and so it was real important for me to go back for a moment and be the mover, to be Deborah Cutrer and not DC, and even saying Deborah Cutrer rather than DC causes a softening of my voice, and I'm not as controlling and I'm not as forceful. I can be when it's needed, but when I'm DC, my presence is commanding. And so when students see me doing these other things, it is like puzzling for them. They don't know where to put that. They don't know whether to laugh. They don't know how to enjoy that part of the experience, because to them that's not who I am. To me, it's all that I am. Does that make sense?
Did you build this house, or did you
Yes.
have this house built?
Well,
in any way?
it's both.
What's it sort of? I don't know. It must have been built with movement in mind, if movement is such a big part of who you are.
Not for me, because I didn't design the house. My wife Catherine did.
Okay.
So really, the whole design is hers. When I first purchased this house, I wasn't married to Catherine It honestly was like, take a rectangular prism and turn it upside down on this lot and let it go straight up. That's what it was. Most of what you see, like this, that right there is where the house ended there. Where you sit right now was not a part of the original structure. It really was a rectangular prism turned upside down on a big lot. It was built by a Portuguese gentleman by the name of George Santos. Neat guy. His grandson is the eye doctor up there in Vineyard Haven. But we bought the house from him, and he built the original structure, and we needed to make it larger in order to make it something we could live in. It was like, I can't even begin to describe it. Like, kitchen was downstairs where now there's an apartment, and there were no windows down. It was just a rectangular box turned upside down with 3 levels. And so this, what you see, has come over since time, since I purchased it in 93. But I didn't design it with movement in mind. But Catherine, I don't know that she designed it with movement in mind, but she was real aware of how she wanted the house to flow.
Yeah.
And you can see that.
Yeah, certainly with space, anyway.
Yeah. You know, she wanted when you walked in the front door that you saw a home, not a hallway. She wanted people to open that front door and to immediately feel welcome into our world. Not that they had to wait in a passageway to be welcomed into a room. That you open that door and you go exactly like you did. Wow, I like this house. I like the colors. It's done with that in mind. You know, the windows everywhere are done for light, because we don't like to be in the dark. You know, even though it's a pain in the neck this time of year because it's cold with all those windows. But in the summertime, when you've got all that light, and even in the winter when it's cold, you know, the light makes so much difference in I forget it's cold outside sometimes because there's so much light and warmth in the house.
How long were the classes? Or when I went to that workshop in Western Mass, it was like all day.
All day.
Yeah. Was that same sort of?
That's an intense study done that way, and because people aren't available necessarily to come every week. People are coming from different places, and so it's easier to house them and have an extensive study. But when I first started with Barbara, like I said, with the children's classes, it'd be every Saturday. You'd be there for about an hour.
Okay, yeah.
And then, you know, when I went into the young adult classes, about the same. When I danced with her companies, because I danced with several of her companies, it was more like what you experienced. We were there all day. We were paid company members. You'd come in at 9 o'clock. You'd dance from 9 to noon with a break in between for a snack. You'd have, like I mentioned earlier, you'd have a 2-hour lunch, and then you'd be expected to come and dance again for 2 hours in the afternoon. But you were working then. It wasn't a class. You were working for Barbara Mettler. Not very often did she fix her work, except when she wanted to do some type of presentation or demonstration. She would call it a demonstration. One of my favorite things that she used to do these free-for-alls, and behind the studio was a massive outdoor space. So you could go through those studio doors that I said Barbara would come through every Saturday, and then you would again step out. And just like you described the feeling of movement in this house, when you stepped out there, you wanted to do exactly, step out and there'd be this circular grass space, big, surrounded by green hedges, about 6 feet high. So as soon as you threw that door open, there's this force that just, made you want to run out and run and lay in the grass and jump and man, it was just one of the most inviting spaces. And in order to show that anyone could move, Barbara, every once in a while, at least twice, 3 times a year, there would be free-for-alls at the studio, and it'd be open to the Tucson community or anybody that was in the area, whether you were schooled in Barbara's dance or not. Everybody just came, and she led these massive classes on the in the outside, what we call the outdoor studio. So that was always one of my favorite things. One year when we in one of her companies, she was in this place where she wanted to show the relationship between dance and the desert kind of thing. So a lot of the movement was done, I think it's in one of her films actually. A lot of the movement was actually done outside that studio I described. She had another lot that was massive, that was just desert terrain with mesquite and cholla and ocotillo cactus and saguaro, just natural desert environment. And we would go out sometimes into that area and dance. That was never my favorite because you couldn't go out and do that barefooted. You had to wear some kind of dance slipper or something, and that's always been contradictory for me. Even right now, to have socks on is not natural, but my feet are cold, so I'm wearing socks. But the dance experience is meant to be, movement is meant to be experienced without being encumbered by things like that, by the tightness of your shoe or your sock, or the freer the garb, the freer the movement. You don't wear tight pants, form-fitting clothes. It's not conducive to free movement.
Wow, let's see. So I thought it was kind of interesting when you said you had sort of a tough childhood, family-wise, because it seems like, unfortunately, it's such a common thing.
Life isn't easy.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see who, for instance, Ted Box, he had, I think, a pretty sort of harsh mother, and it's very fascinating to me that he's went through this really tough time, and yet he kind of came out and and he wasn't resentful, and he was very, now he's content. He didn't feel like something was taken away from him or something like that. I think it's probably because of his spirituality or something like that. And other people who are in the same position, same as you, where they came away and they tried, or they didn't let it affect them too negatively. I think having something like movement, or Ted's case, spirituality, or something that can kind of lead that person is pretty valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, because those creative things, though we don't necessarily always see a tangible result, in creating, you're leaving a piece of yourself. Whether it's in what Ted Box does in a beautifully crafted piece of furniture, or in his movement. Same thing for me, whether it's a moment of dance for me, or movement, or an interaction with a student, or watching a student grow from someone who sees themselves being something different than they saw when they first came into me, that's where we leave our mark. We leave our mark when we die. It's not about the money we make. It's not about who we knew. It's about what we did with that time and how we grow with that time. And my interactions, not only with movement, but with my students, those things all leave me richer. It's not just about what I bring to my students or what I bring to movement. It's about what those things, and be engaged in those things, what those things do to me, what they bring to my life. And I think you're right. I think when you step over that line and you go into life not feeling, once you're able to let go of the resentments that restrict you, then you're living your life. Until then, you're basically caught in the stuff that is sweeping you up. One of the things that I envy you, and I don't know much about you or your family, but there's a real genuine support system around you that nurtures your desire to do or experience most anything that's positive and not dangerous. And a lot of kids don't have that. I was fortunate enough that my mom had the desire to bring those things to my life. Even though she couldn't make them happen by her engagements with me, she didn't make them happen by introducing me to people like Barbara Mettler, Callie Francis, Katie Davies, who was my camp director when I was a kid. My mom worked to bring a lot of rich experiences to my life, despite her own sadness as a person.
The What's Written Within group that meets on Wednesdays that I go to, I think at one point you expressed interest in possibly coming and dancing with us.
Yeah, I'll wait till you graduate.
That sounds reasonable.
And that's not, more than anything, that's about me. So like I was talking a few minutes ago, about how hard it is for me to turn off the relationship that is intuitively in place for me.
Yeah, that's what sort of made me think of that, was like...
Yeah, after you graduate.
Yeah, you were just, yeah.
Then, that'll be a different... And I will be able to relate to you in movement differently then.
Right.
Right? Because now my relationship would still be governed by the fact that you might be a fellow mover, but you're also my student. And movement, creative movement especially, that's a real physical exchange of energy. People that I move with, we roll up and down against each other. We're bouncing off each other like ping pong balls, We're clumped in a clutch, smelling each other's sweat and perspiration, There's a line there that I can't cross with you yet, And it's not...
I think one sort of beautiful thing about that is that when we do get a chance to move together,
it'll be a good time.
Yeah.
It'll be a good time.
Yeah.
It'll be a real good time. But it won't be DC and Dylan.
Right.
It'll be two movers in space. Yeah. We'll have a great time. But I have to be able to let go of that part of our relationship first.
Yeah. Well,
when you graduate, I'll be able to do that.
It's very interesting then that you in this way, it's kind of, this project is bridging the gap, because it's like, it's a school project and yet it's on movement, and it's very interesting. Your eyes so totally lit up when I was like, hey DC, I'm doing a study on movement, and at that time I didn't even know that you did this. I was just casually just saying, because I was excited about what my portfolio was on.
You didn't know my connection.
I had no idea that I guess that's kind of the way you would have it, because that's the way, your students.
Those other things, they cloud the issue too much, but yeah, There's nothing that gives me more joy, and I love my students, you know that. There's nothing I love more than walking in that classroom every day and teaching math and seeing my kids grow. There's only one thing I love more, and that's moving. Because movement is my soul connection. Movement allows me to do all those things that I do well. I do well because I move. Because I'm a mover, and because I've been moving since I was 10 years old. And the joy that that gives me, the sanity that that brings to my day-to-day, my relationship with Barbara, all of that, that's all governing.